Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I'm currently sitting at my computer watching the natural selection event. Man, Travis Rice and crew once again put on the best live event in snow. Everything about this event is amazing for the riders, and more importantly, it's just as amazing for the viewers at home. This is the best live streamed event I've ever seen, and each one keeps getting better. Props to everyone involved, but especially Todd Richards and Mary Walsh. While everyone is giving great insight, I feel these two are carrying the broadcast, and it's awesome. And in terms of the riding, all the riders are so talented, but Travis Rice, that dude is a Michael Jordan level talent who seemingly pays attention to every detail of the production, and then he goes out and he outrides the field. The event isn't over yet, but I'm willing to bet that if it comes down to one final run and the pressure is on Travis Rice, like it was a couple events ago, he will deliver. That's what the greats do. They deliver every time. And I look at Travis Rice as next to Craig Kelly, the greatest snowboarder to ever strap in. So thanks to Travis and the whole natural selection crew. There is nothing like your event. It would be freaking incredible to include skiing in the future, as I don't think there's a skier right now that can pull something like this off. But you know what? I doubt you will ever include skiing in your event, and I don't hold that against you. I mean, I can't imagine what it costs to pull something like this off. And when things are expensive, it's important to have a dude like Travis at the head of everything. Speaking of expensive, this is like the most expensive week of my year, or of my life almost, it feels like. Actually, probably having a kid is more expensive. But last week, we had to replace our furnace, and this week, we have to do our roof. That's like 30 grand worth of work in 5 days. It makes me sick to my stomach, but that's part of the game of being a homeowner. And I like to complain, so that's why I'm sharing this. A dude who doesn't like to complain is my guest this week. And while I don't know Jason Borgstede personally, I know all about him during his snowboard career. I was working at Buzzes and Vale, riding 100 days a year, and I considered myself to be a snowboarder back then. And while my whole life revolved around snowboarding at that point, I made sure that I knew everything that was going on both in skiing and snowboarding, which really helps me with what I do today. So I was familiar with Jason's career, but it seemed like a flash in the pan. And by the early 2000s, I didn't hear his name anymore. But over the years, we've traded messages based around snowboard episodes of the podcast. And he's always been really cool to me, and he usually throws in a little barb about skiing, but he does it in a fun way. And then I do the exact same thing back, but with the snowboard angle. And Jason's cool with that. But Jason is a core dude who, while I don't think we talked about it, he lives those unwritten rules of snowboarding and skateboarding, which meant that I wasn't even sure he'd want to do the podcast with me, because for the most part, this is a ski podcast. But Jason's a rad dude, and our conversation was really refreshing. He doesn't hold back, and it's awesome. Before we get into it, I know I ask every week, but please, please, please tell your friends about the show. Podcasts are hard to find, and telling someone who you know will really like it really does help the show grow. Another thing that helps the podcast grow is star rating it on iTunes. It bumps me up in the algorithm, which gets more earballs on the show. This only takes a minute to do, and it's greatly appreciated. So thank you for doing it, and thank you for supporting the brands that make the show possible. They are Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elan Skis, Stanley, Rollerblade, and Best Day Brewing. Now, let's talk to Borgie, Jason Borgstede. I like to start off the podcast with odd things, and the one I want to start off with you is all about a feat of strength, or maybe it's more a feat of endurance, but describe the bet that you won $3,000 off of.
I believe I was in the neighborhood of 40 years old. I had moved back to Alaska not that long before that. And the idea came up about a marathon. And I have been in the poker world for a while, so there was always talk of different marathon bets. And so I brought this up among some people, one of them being a friend that was also into poker and skateboarding and stuff like that. And I said, I bet I could do that. A little bit of discussion back and forth, and a little bit of, no, there's no way you're going to be able to do that. I think this kid went back and asked a few friends, and they were like, oh, back up the truck. There's no way. At 40 some years old, or 40, having not ran since high school, which at that point was 22 years, somewhere in that. And the bet was not just if I could run a marathon or not. It was, could I do it in under 5.5 hours? And could I do it with no training?
So off the couch.
Right, off the couch. I've long held to the old school of your snowboard training was anti-jock. It was just skateboarding. You just skateboard, that's your summer training, and then you snowboard. And, obviously that's not the best way to do it. We've learned from that. You don't have to be a jock anymore, to work out or any of that. But that's where the mentality was rooted deeply in me. When you're in the end of the 80s and early 90s in high school as a skater, you were either a jock that pumped iron or a skater that didn't want to have anything to do with that. So bet was made. And the only thing I could do as far as training was things that I would normally do right now. And this person knew I didn't go to the gym. He knew I didn't run. So I couldn't do any of that stuff.
So you could just go to the skate park and stuff like that?
Yeah, or I could walk. I walked a lot.
Okay.
Every day I would go to the track. I think about a month or so, maybe a little more than a month. I just started eating a little bit better. I started walking every day. So I would go to the track and I would walk miles every day just to get my body used to that kind of repetitive motion. I started researching, trying to figure out what the best techniques were. Turns out there's an interval situation. So it was highly unlikely, if not impossible, that I could run the entire thing.
Right.
So what I settled on was running 1 minute, walking 1 minute, running 1 minute, walking 1 minute. And I would have a schedule on my wrist of when I had to be at what mile point to make this thing work. I had a little wristband thing that would beep every minute and it would tell me, so now you can walk. The bet actually started going pretty well. I mean, Mike, I'm the kind of person that is, I don't know, there was no chance I wasn't going to win this. I just believed completely that I was going to win this. There was a chance I might not, but I believed I was going to win it.
I mean, if you had to crawl over the finish line to do it, you were going to do it. It did not matter what was going on. You were going to finish because that's the kind of dude you are.
100%. That was a discussion had in my head at mile 18.
Like, I might have to crawl.
I might have to crawl. So I bet this person, I got 3-1 odds and I put up some money and went for it. Started the event, was cruising, no problem, killing it. I would say about 12 miles in or so, I started to feel a little tinge in one knee, but my pace was such that I could have probably gotten in there around 4.5 hours.
Okay.
So busted the time open by about an hour.
Yeah.
And was feeling great. And my not yet wife at the time was full support, had signs up for me.
And that shit does a lot for you when you're like 18 miles into a marathon, right?
Oh, it was super cool. Actually, right at the beginning, she pulls up with a sign that says, I get to marry bib number, my number. Got me a little all emotional to start the race. And then her and my other high school skateboard friend were there along the way to, here's a drink. How you doing? Keep it going. Mile 18 comes. I roll up and there's this bridge that I have to come across. And now my knee has really started to hurt and the other one has started to hurt too. And I go across this bridge and she's at a turnaround there and she goes, are you doing okay? Because I didn't look great on my face. And
Right.
I said, no. She said, are you okay? And I said, no. And she just dropped. She sunk right there. And I said, I hurt. My knees hurt real bad, but I'm going to keep going. And at that point, I could time it out. And I was like, I don't know how this is going to play now. I'm no longer running. And I've determined that there will be no more running during this event for me.
Okay.
It's too much. And walking is getting pretty bad. So I'm pretty ahead of time and I'm looking at it, trying to contemplate, okay, slow it down. Do I stop for 30 minutes and take a break? Or do I keep going and potentially have to crawl? I may have enough time to do that if I had to. These are all just scenarios playing out in my head, but never at any point was the option, you're going to quit. It's slightly more realistic that I might not win the bet now.
Right.
But quit was never there. Quit was not on the table. Anyway, just under 5 hours, I'm pulling up to the last stretch. I decide I'm going to try to run at home, this last little thing. It was probably the most decrepit looking run that you could put together, but I managed to pass the finish line in just a hair over 5 hours and won the bet and received payments from the person for a while till the debt was paid off.
That is incredible. And I read about this in your blog, and you kind of related battling a trick in skateboarding and snowboarding to finishing a marathon, but I can't really remember exactly what you said. How do you relate that?
I think what I drew some inspiration from was Danny Way. And Danny Way had done a few times, I think this happened to him, but in particular, I think the Wall of China, he tore something.
Yep.
His ankle, I believe. And I think also the first mega ramp when he did a drop in out of the helicopter.
Yeah.
I think he hurt something there and said to himself, okay, you're hurt now. Now you have X amount of time until this pain really sets in. So you got to get to work and finish this before that happens. And that was something that I drew from. So it wasn't as much the battling of the trick. It was just a skateboarder that inspired me. You know, everything that I pull is from skateboarding, from snowboarding, from a skater, from a snowboarder. This is the world that is my life, and the heroes that I have are from it. The style inspiration is from it. The attributes I aspire to attain in my life come from people within that world. I just wholly and fully believe in it and let it drive everything I do.
That is pretty awesome just hearing that. And while I'm on the topic of gambling, you're a straight edge guy. And when professional snowboarding ended for you, you became a poker player for like 7 years. And while we'll talk about the end of snowboarding later, I read that your whole gambling career started with you being a warm body at poker tables that needed players. What was that all about?
That came a little bit later. So what happened was I never gambled. I never did anything. You know, we didn't grow up with much money. To reel it back just for a second, we didn't have much at all. My mom raised me as a single parent, and she didn't have anything. And she put herself through nursing school, worked jobs while she did it, fought tooth and nail to give me a chance to have some opportunity in life.
Awesome.
So I very much valued money. So as snowboarding was starting to wind down, which I didn't know it was, I just thought maybe I'm in a lull where I don't have a sponsor. I stumbled upon, they were training some poker dealers one day in Reno. I sat down, played this little $10 tournament. I played another one, lost them both right away. But I was bit by this bug of understanding this new game, which some people played at their table with their family. I never did that growing up. So I had to learn it. I went and bought a DVD that taught me a little bit about the basics that night. I went back the next day and did okay in those same single table tournaments, won a few dollars, and then it was off to the races. I was completely enamored by this idea of trying to switch from using my body for my living into, hey, I could pursue this thing where it's a puzzle to figure out and it has consequence to it and it takes study. And it parallels my snowboarding in that you got to be self-motivated. If you don't put in the work, then you're going to fail and your peers around you will do the winning. So eventually that led to a time when snowboarding was completely over, for sure, 100%. And I lived in Vegas for about a year and a half. And I met somebody at the Hard Rock and they said, hey, I'm running this room. We need what we call prop players. So you come in, you get paid $15 an hour, and you sit here in the room. And when the game gets late and it starts to get low-handed, people start to leave. They don't want the game to break because they pull rake, which is the amount they charge to run the game, essentially, out of every pot that is played.
Okay.
They want to keep that money-generating machine going all night as much as possible. So they would hire a group of props. We played with our own money. We were just given $15 an hour to be present there. And if a seat opened up, they called you off the bench and they said, go play in that game. And then when it started to fill up, they would pull you out.
So you're getting paid to play, and if you win, you get to keep your winnings.
Correct.
That's awesome.
If I lose, though, it's on me. So you got to figure out, do I have a winning hourly rate? And everybody that plays poker says yes to that question. But when you're forced to sit in games, my shift was from 3 a.m. to 8 a.m. So I showed up at the casino at 3 a.m., clocked on, and sat there, and they would have me playing games until 8 a.m. If I lost, if my hourly rate was bad, if I had incorrectly calculated that and I was a losing player, then that $15 is going to get eaten into in the long run. And I'm actually going to make less than that per hour.
Yep.
So they probably hired like 10 to 12 people to do this as the program started. A couple months later, when the program kind of ended, there were only 2 of us left. All the other people went broke. So poker is another thing where you really have to just be completely honest with yourself, your ability level, and most people aren't. If you want to have a chance at it, you got to be honest about it.
Yeah, and most people just want to live the dream and they're not honest with themselves, like you say. How many hours a week are you playing poker?
I would say in the beginning, a lot more than in the end. As in the end, I became kind of jaded with it, disliked it, and wanted to get out of it. But in the early times, I was just glued to the seat in the casino. First couple of years, I was living in Truckee, and so I would play in Reno, and I would drive down almost every night of the week and play from 7-ish in the evening until the game broke or I just couldn't deal with it anymore. Some nights that was 2 a.m., some nights that was 5 a.m. And usually the later it was meant the worse situation I was in financially that evening.
And you're trying to like win it all and get yourself back.
Yeah, you get a one-way ticket to Stuckville right at the beginning of a session. And yeah, you'll convince yourself that you need to be there for 3 days.
How much is the most you've ever won in a night of playing cards?
The most I've won was, I think, about 21,000, and that was in a tournament.
How many people in the tournament?
I got second place, and I think there was probably 100 to 140.
What's the rush like when you get second place in a tournament like that compared to maybe taking a big air at X Games? I mean, is it like the same kind of feeling where it's just total adrenaline and you're psyched, or has it been going on so long in poker that it's just like you're relieved it's over?
Yeah, they're not even close. For me, they're not the same thing. And I think that's because although I was passionate about poker, it didn't feel like my life's work, like what I was meant to be doing. And snowboarding came along at a time where it grabbed me and became everything I was, my identity, my passion. It represented everything that I was going to put into life to show. It was my Rocky moment. You know, every event I won was Rocky at the end of the fight, getting beat up and then overcoming all to triumph, you know?
Yep.
So a poker tournament, it's pretty cool, but I'll tell you, winning second place in anything is the most upset you'll ever be to win.
You're the first loser there.
That's right. And again, if you're honest with yourself, you know that you played pretty well, but you had to get lucky along the way to win. And then in sports, most of the time, I'm not going to get lucky if I win a big air event or a slope style.
No, it's all based on skill and ability and time spent.
And that's why poker was ultimately very difficult for me, because I had come from sports and competitiveness where the best won, and it would happen time after time. There was not really any getting lucky. There could be judges in the way or things like that. But when you sit down and you play somebody in poker, luck has to be there or the game wouldn't exist. The best people would just win all the money and walk away and it would be over. So if luck wasn't there, we just wouldn't have it. So you understand, like, people can get lucky when they're not as good at you as you, and you can get lucky against other people. So personally, it's tougher to deal with emotionally for my personality type because of that.
Okay. And then in thinking about how much the most you've lost in a night of playing cards, what's that number?
Probably in the neighborhood of $3,000.
Well, that's a pretty good spread, you know. I mean, 21's the most you've won. You've lost 3 is the most you've lost. So that's not really terrible. Have you ever seen any seedy shit in the world of gambling, like broken arms or the kind of shit you see in movies? Does that happen in the underworld of gambling?
I play in a lot of games that are maybe not, they're not held in casino.
Okay.
And I was in a raided one once in another town here in Alaska. I was in a game that got raided by a bunch of state troopers, local police, and I think DEA people or firearms tobacco people. They believed sinister activities were going on. The activities were not going on. It was just people playing poker. And then they wanted to make an example of the place. So I haven't seen seedy stuff go down. I've been in the middle of the door breaking down and guns coming in and stuff like that.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. I've been in much more seedy stuff through the things I'm passionate about than I have through poker. Most of the time you try to play poker in a casino, keep it safe, keep it mellow, and not have to deal with that. I've seen a few fights around the table, but nothing crazy.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start things off with Rollerblade. Ski season is coming to a close, and if you're like me, your ski legs are really firing right now. If you're also like me, you sometimes slack in the summertime, and getting those ski legs back is so hard. I found a way to fix that problem. Inline skating. Not only is it fun, but it'll keep you in ski shape all year long, all while burning the same amount of calories that you would by running or biking. And if you're a runner, switch to inline. It's going to save your knees. And if you're a biker, save your bank account. Skates are a fraction of the cost of a bike, and they travel so much easier. And for everyone, Rollerblade has an award-winning skate-to-ski app that will get you in the best shape of your life for ski season. To find out more about the app and to find out more about all the amazing skates, head on over to rollerblade.com. Next up, it's Best Day Brewing. If you haven't tried what critics and myself are calling the best NA beer on the planet, you are missing out. Look, I'm not going to quit drinking beer completely, and I'm not asking you to do that. But we all have times where we want an ice-cold beer, but we don't want something that's going to slow us down. You know, when you have to take your kid places, driving to the mountain, there's all kinds of reasons why you don't need to be slowed down in this life. And Best Day is crafted for us doers out there. The skiers, the snowboarders, the bikers, the skaters, the hikers, you know, people like us. And they support cool things like this podcast, Michelle Parker, Darren Ralphs, and they are all over the pickleball scene. So if you play that, know that Best Day's supporting you. And while all that stuff is cool, I drink Best Day for the flavor. I've been loving their hazy IPA and their Kolsch lately. It tastes just as good as its alcoholic cousins without all the calories. I mean, these are both under 70 calories. One's like 53. So next time you're at the store, pick up the NA beer that supports our kind of people and will make you have your best day ever. I'm talking about Best Day Brewing. To find out more about the brand, the events, and the flavors, head on over to bestdaybrewing.com. My final sponsor this round is Elan Skis. And if you haven't had a chance to ski on one of the Ripsticks models, you're not skiing as well as you possibly can. I mean, there's a reason why Elan's been building a cult following over the past couple years in the States. And it's because their skis are lively, playful, fun, all while remaining stable at speed. Ask anyone you see who's skiing on an Elan, and they'll tell you right away, the skis are making them a better skier. And that's important. When you're buying a high-performance product, the hope is that it's going to make you perform better. And Elan does that every time. And Elan has some new models in the pipeline that are going to show a whole new generation how fun skiing can be when you're on an Elan. On top of that, they have a state-of-the-art factory that's powered by renewable energy provided by solar panels, and 70% of the materials they use to build their skis are sourced within 250 miles of their factory or less. To find out more about Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. You're from St. Louis, Missouri, and what are the highlights of living in the Midwest? I know you weren't there that long, but was it just like Clydesdales and baseball?
I was only in St. Louis for the first couple months of my life.
Oh, okay. It was that quick.
I was born there, went there. As I went back to visit my dad and his family, they are amazing people. So I got pretty much all-star treatment. Yes, we got to go see Clydesdales. We'd go to the Arch. There was awesome little kids museums out there. There was some zoos and things like that. Just a great family that unfortunately I didn't get to experience that much because of the separation of my parents at a couple months old. So St. Louis has that connection with the Borgstede side of my family, and I didn't get to experience much of it.
Okay, so then your mom, she takes you to California when you're just a couple of months old. I didn't realize it was that young that you went there. And it sounds like you don't go to like the best part of Southern California. The part of Oxnard that you're in is kind of, I won't say seedy, but it's not like the upper or middle class place. Was it tough growing up in that part of California where there is crime and gangs and shit like that? Are you exposed to all that stuff at a young age?
Yeah. How do I put it? I was exposed to it as in we were around it. It was in the streets. You know, you would hear gunshots at night and things like that. But there was another couple kids on my little circle there that were really awesome. This one kid, Gustavo, I knew him as Junior. Nice kid. Him and I would play together all the time, and we were kind of a little too young to be getting involved in that stuff. And I think he had a pretty awesome family that kind of kept him away from it. And then around kindergarten time, my mom moved us to Texas so that she could go to a nursing school there, put herself through that. That part of Texas was pretty poor. I don't know what you want to call it, just basically poor kids trying to get through. And there was a lot of shit talking. God, you don't call it shit talking at that age. You know, you're just capping on each other. Your mom this, your mom that, or you might have to get in a scrap or something like that. It was like eat or be eaten at that time.
Yep.
If you didn't learn how to verbally handle yourself, then you were going to get talked on enough that you were going to shrink into the shadows. And people were physical. It wasn't a big deal to have a scrap when you were kids back then. So you learn to scrap or don't. But we weren't out fighting all the time. I mean, I'm talking about like 6 and 7 years old. But I definitely got into fights at that age. And in particular, I believe it was first grade. In the morning at the school, a kid came over. He got sent back from like the third grade section of the school. And I decided it was pretty funny to make fun of that. I don't know why.
Kids are kids, man.
So I was like, ha ha, you got... And as soon as I did that, he punched me square in the nose. Blood coming out my nose. I don't remember it hurting, but I remember I got a real great lesson drilled into me that day, was that if you can say whatever you want, but you got to understand that there are going to be consequences for what you say. And I was really grateful for that lesson, and it served me well to pick my battles from that point on.
And when you say you learned that lesson, I mean, I think like you growing up with a single mom who's got to work her ass off to give you all the opportunities that you have in the world, or whatever opportunities she's able to create for you. I mean, without having a dad at home, is that a challenge? Like, is that why you have to learn lessons like that at school, because you don't have a positive male role model teaching you shit at home?
Yeah, I don't want to like let it go too far into not having a positive male role model, because that would downplay some important men that came through my life. When I was around the California times, my uncle was an integral part of that. He was more like an older brother. I guess he was kind of between older brother and uncle, but he was not like dad. But he was there to, continue to hold the line of what was right and wrong, help me learn to play sports, things like that, take me fishing, doing some cool stuff that you need. My mom also had a boyfriend for a long time named Bobby, who, same thing, he was in and out kind of, but along the way, he was really kind to me, would take me fishing out in Texas. He helped introduce me to his family, so we had some sort of support there. Nobody ever squared me up and said, this is how you throw hands, but they would help out. Like, a really important thing was that Bobby helped me get football gear so that I could play football and help get that angst as a kid out. The things that I was missing, you would run into other kids and tackle, and it was healthy and active and kept you in a better space. So you didn't feel poor. You didn't feel any of that struggle the way that, when you look back on it, that you actually went through. But mom really taught me the most of it. In particular, one time I came home and said I got in a fight because kids were saying, your mama this, your mama that. And she said, look, I work hard to help you out here. None of that stuff hurts my feelings. So don't you dare ever get in another fight because somebody says some words about me. That was another important lesson. She was really strong at helping me see good versus bad, right versus wrong, and understanding what was important to stand up for.
Nice. Well, I know baseball was a major passion of yours until you were like in high school, but around 4th grade is when you find skateboarding. And how do you find it?
My mom was dating a different guy in California, and we had moved over to Ventura for a little while. We lived on this side of town called the Avenue, and he had a towing yard. And he also ran a gas station. And I would go after school and sit in the back of the gas station and read books. And video stores were just starting to pop up. VHS stuff was just starting to pop up. And he knew the guy who owned the video store across the street. So every once in a while, we'd go over there and we'd get to rent a movie. And one time I was walking down the rows and I see a movie, and it was one of the Bones Brigade videos. And I don't know what it was. I hadn't seen much of it around, but I was instantly drawn to the aesthetic of the cover. And then I looked at it and I watched it. We rented it. I watched it. I thought this was amazing. And that Christmas, I got my first skateboard under the tree. I didn't have any friends to skate with. I was pretty much a loner kid, but I would let my dog run me up and down the block while I was riding the board. I got super into trying to do little acid drops and stuff, usually onto grass because there's less consequence.
For sure.
I would maybe try a hand plant in the front yard on the grass. And I wasn't really that good at it, but I liked it. And then when we ended up back in Oxnard, a skate shop popped up. And back then you could be 10 years old and your mom would be like, cool, be back by dinner time.
Totally.
You would bike or skate miles around town, which could be shady. It could be whatever, but it wasn't a big deal. So I found myself skating miles to this skate shop and sat there and watched Animal Chin on their VHS in the place and would ask for change instead of for the ice cream truck to buy stickers at this store. All the cheap stuff that you could barely afford, like little foam rip grip patches for the edge of the deck, some stickers, a piece of clear grip tape, just a little square to go over the logo on the top. And I remember I had a painter's cap. I bought a pink painter's cap at the skate shop.
Man, they were hot back then.
Yeah.
And the painter's caps that had the things that went down back on your neck.
Yeah.
That was so funny that people wore that shit.
Yes. So I found myself like really enamored with it, really loving it and being stoked on that culture, that vibe. And then I was getting set to learn how to surf.
Because you're back in California and it's all like sideways shit at that point. You're in the epicenter.
Yeah. So this is like 84. And I don't know how this happened because I didn't know how to ollie yet. I didn't know any of that. And yet 3 years later, I got a second skateboard, I think for my birthday, maybe. So I got this Hasoi board that my mom got from the local bike shop. So at this point now I have two complete skateboards. Don't know how to ollie. Don't really know what I'm doing, but I do know that I love to ride around on the board. And I love the whole vibe. I have Skull and Crossbones Vans skate highs. You know, I'm just in love with this whole thing.
Are you getting into punk rock and all that shit at that time too? Just everything that goes along with skateboarding? No?
Not yet. Not till I got into junior high or high school did I really get into punk stuff. But my aunt, uncle, and cousin, who's also an only child, lived in Hawaii in the Navy. So we would kind of swap back and forth summers. And one summer I go out there to hang out with them. And my mom had known this other friend in California whose son was on a surf team. They were like, we got you a board. When you come back from Hawaii, he's going to teach you how to surf. And I was like, yes, this is going to be awesome. Snowboarding, I didn't even know existed yet.
Right.
And then at the end of the summer, I get a call saying, hey, the guy I'm dating who's from Alaska, Larry, we're going to get married out there at the end of the summer. Then we're going to come back and we're going to drive to Alaska. And my jaw hit the floor and I was like, what the fuck? What? Alaska? Life is over. I was like, what are we going to do in Alaska?
I mean, are you pissed off? Because like it's such an impressionable age and you finally have friends and your skate community and people want to get you on the surf team and everything for this loner kid is kind of changing. It's like you have a little bit of a crew and you have a vision of what the future is going to be in California. And then you're going to Alaska, which I mean, I would be just so pissed off.
I don't know if I was pissed as much as just shocked, and I was flabbergasted over it. I was like, what? I was pretty disappointed. I might have trusted my mom a lot at that point. So as I look back and try to figure out why I wasn't more pissed. But yeah, a little pissed, a little bit more just like shock. So we moved to Alaska. I do the first winter there sledding. I had some stepbrothers and we would just go sledding, meaning like there's a good hill by the houses and you would just get a little orange Paris sled. And that would be like my Saturdays. I'd go to the sledding hill and bring some snacks and sled all day, trying to think I was doing tricks or cool stuff on that. And this is the beginning of 8th grade for me. So I go through 8th grade doing that. And spring comes around and I start to gravitate towards the skaters. And back then there was a heavy line drawn. It was skaters, jocks, stoners, and preps. Those were your groups in school. Fall into one or just be on the sidelines. You know, it was basically Breakfast Club right there. So I was like, cool. I guess I could reel it back just a second. Like I said, I was who I was, and I was not a person who would go around starting fights or looking to be aggressive or anything. But when it came to a fight or flight situation, I usually fought, and it was usually immediate. You know, if I felt threatened or something, I punched, and then we dealt with it later.
Sure.
And I would try to get out of that situation. No, I'm not painting the picture of a brawler or a bully or any of that. I wasn't into that.
You handled your business when you had to.
I felt threatened, and that's how it happened. And I say that because I was at the lunch table in 8th grade, and it's the springtime, and a kid is pulling on my sweater, and I'm like, let go, you're pulling my sweater out, and he's laughing at me, and he wouldn't let go. So my first reaction was crack, and I hit him in the face. No thought of consequence. It's funny. We always say, don't you think of what was going to happen? No. At that point in your life, that part of the brain isn't formed yet that really calculates risk and consequence. So I hit him. He let go. We went on with the day, and then my hand really hurt later. And I come home later that night, and it's really hurting. And my mom, I think, had made some steak. And I said, hey, Mom, can you cut this for me? Because my hand really hurts. And she said, let me see it. I hold my hand up. She said, who'd you hit? And I'm immediately scared. So my mom's a nurse, and she knows immediately I have a boxer's fracture. That you only get those one way.
Right.
That's why they call them a boxer's fracture. I had hit with the pinky instead of the front knuckles, and that bone right there just buckles. So she's like, who'd you punch? And I said, nobody. I was running in gym class, and when I went to stop, like against the wall, you have to stop real fast. I put my hands in like, when you do push-ups on your knuckles.
Yep.
I motioned like that, and she was like, okay. And yeah, I had to go get my hand casted up, and I missed the beginning of baseball season. So I was all hyped. I'm going to play baseball up here and, continue that route. So now I could no longer play baseball. I missed the season. Well, I decided when the cast came off and baseball season was already not going to happen. Okay, I'm going to get into the skateboard thing. I'm going to go home and I'm going to learn how to ollie, and we're going to get this thing moving. I kind of figured that out. And then I head to Hawaii to spend the summer with my cousin, and we skate nonstop. He's into skateboarding at that point. And we just skate every day. As soon as we got off the plane, we dropped the bags. He was like, I'm going to take you to these ramps that are built here. First inch high curb I get to, I try to ollie. Ollies aren't down that well yet. Boom, hang up, face plant on the ground. Yeah, and that was my introduction to skating. And we got so into it, and that solidified, like, this is my route from here on out.
It's time for my second sponsor break. And if you haven't shopped at Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, you aren't only letting me down, you are missing out on the best shopping experience online or in person. Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the deals, and the best products from the world of skis, snowboard, inline, wakeboarding, and so much more. What I love about Peter Glenn is that they price match. If you find a product at a reputable dealer for a lower price, Peter Glenn will match that price. They also offer free shipping on orders of $50 or more, and it's always easy to return something at Peter Glenn if you don't like it. That's important, because if you get something that doesn't fit, you don't want to hassle returning it. And some retailers make it a hassle, not Peter Glenn. So next time you're in the market for anything outdoor related, support the brand that makes this show happen and head on over to peterglenn.com. My final sponsor is Stanley, the iconic Seattle brand that has been outfitting your adventures since 1913. For over 90 years, Stanley has been the right choice for the planet. And if you don't have a Stanley water bottle, it's time to rethink your drinking habits. I mean, it's 2023, and using single-use plastics are unacceptable these days. Good thing is, I'm going to make it easier than ever for you to get that water bottle, all of your camping and storage needs, and more. Yep, I'm going to save you 30% on all of your Stanley products. If I were you, I would pick up 6 of the pint glasses, which I use every single day, a water bottle, and a bunch of their food storage and camping stuff that you're going to need this summer. To get the deal, all you need to do is head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and when you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST. That's all lowercase and no spaces, and you're going to save 30% on your order. It's a sweet deal that I hope you take advantage of. Those are my sponsors. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast. You come back to Alaska, and you're the skater, and you're not playing baseball anymore, and I feel like this is kind of when you find out about snowboarding, but you find out about it through a television commercial.
Yeah.
Please tell me it was the Stick It Kingwell Snickers commercial that seemed to be in heavy rotation during our youth.
I think that, well, Kinger and I are in the same age group, so it was not that yet. This is like 89, in the fall of 89, and I see a commercial come on, and I'm almost positive it was for this skate shop up here called G&B, and they had used some stock footage and put it with their thing, and it was a guy, he's doing something in the powder. It's no monumental trick. It was no monumental pow arc carved thing of beauty. It was none of that. It was just kind of going across some flats, and it was enough to go, what is that? I need to do that. And so when the winter started to pop up, we went down to the local sporting goods store and went halves because, like I said, there were not many free rides. And there was a $50 black snowboard, Black Snow, the brand.
All plastic, no metal edges.
All plastic, no metal edges. It was called the Legend. It was black and with pink silk screen on it and no metal edges. Horrific thing, but I couldn't have been more pumped. It was $50. I paid 25. She paid 25. We got this thing, took it to the sledding hill, and I used it for a couple weeks until I could bomb down the hill. There wasn't even a thought of turning yet. It was just make it down this, it was a pretty good pitch on this little hill, and it was a down, flat down. And yeah, I figured out how to do that, and immediately it was time to step up. So we went to G&B. We said, what do you have used? And they had a used board section. I bought a GNU anti-gravity for $100. Sold the Black Snow, I think, for $50. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the anti-gravity.
Not really.
It's essentially an ironing board.
I do know what you're talking about now that you say that. Like no flex whatsoever.
No flex whatsoever. Okay. And I'm like, I don't know what I am. I got into wrestling in junior high up here and in high school. And I think I wrestled at 119 at that point.
You're a small kid.
Yeah. I'm 119 pounds and trying to snowboard on this man-sized 165, I think it was, that's thick as a door and about as flexible and has metal edges now. So I get to the sledding hill. I'm about to tear this up. I got my new professional board. I'm all psyched. I go 10 feet and slam because now metal edges are a whole different story. They dig right in and I go right to my face.
Yeah, the slams happen quick.
Yeah. So that was a new thing. I kind of went through the same process. I learned how to make it down this hill. I took that board to a place called Hilltop, the local hill in Anchorage, and I rode it a couple times there. And I took it to Arctic Valley, which became my home spot, which is a more aggressive mountain, but not quite Alyeska level.
That's the first park in Alaska, right? Was that Arctic Valley?
It was the first half pipe there. And yeah, I would say it was the first park.
Okay.
Because they were building us some, although pretty heinous piles of snow, but they were piles of snow with the intent of jumping from one side to the other.
They were trying.
Yes. And I'm not downing snowboard park jump and making fun of it. I'm saying they literally would put a pile up that was about 10, 15 feet by 10 or 15 feet. And we would shape up the sides and they would say, cool, do it. And it was a rubble pile, but they would do it and they were down with it. And they had a fence line to catch snow and that formed like a spine and a few other features over there. Long story short, though, I took that board out there, and the first day I was there, I got smoked really bad to the point where I had to walk from the hill is kind of divided into two sides, not like a veil or something, like you can see the other one 100 yards away.
Yeah.
But I had gotten hurt enough that I was like, okay, I need to walk back to this other one. And my ego was bruised. And I was like, all right, I better go back to Hilltop. I'm not ready for this hill yet. And shortly after that, dude, this is the crazy thing. I think back and I have like 3 boards in the first season that I'm snowboarding. So I sell the GNU anti-gravity because one of the shops in town is having a spring sale. So I'm able to buy a more fitting board with a better flex, more current, and get a great deal on that. I sell the GNU. I buy this other board. I go back to Arctic Valley, and now I'm handling my business at Arctic Valley, and now I'm Arctic Valley local. All of this in the span of one season.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was like, there was no thought. I don't know why, but I've always been this person that immediately thought they were going to be a professional at whatever they were interested in. So when I was in Texas, I played football. I was like, obviously, I'm going to play for the Dallas Cowboys. And we're talking about like 3rd grade here. But you dream big as a kid. I would play full football games by myself, imaginary football games, dodging and all this. And this becomes a theme later on. Then we move back to California. I find baseball. I get super entrenched in baseball. I go to baseball camp. I'm getting really good at it. I'm down. Obviously, I'm from north of LA. I'm going to be a Dodger. Dude, I'm telling you, Mike, I would get so dedicated to something. So I would throw the ball onto my roof where I couldn't see it. And I would get real up close so I couldn't see the thing rolling, so that I would get these like blind reaction time things. I was basically like learning how to drill myself.
Yeah, like it hit the gutter and just shoot a different way.
Yeah. And I would dive or do whatever. And I would just have to react within a couple feet of it. I would pitch a full game against a quarter pipe that we had gotten so that it would bounce different ways and I'd have to catch the ball. And it was all these loner scenarios all day. And then I'd go to practice and then I'd do well. And, I just, all right, I'm going to be a Dodger. Then I break my hand. I get into skateboarding. Let's be honest, there were never any delusions of being a pro skater because I was never very good at it. I was good enough to have fun, but
skateboarding's hard.
It is. Snowboarding came along and immediately I was like, this is my life now. All I'm going to do is skateboard and snowboard. When I'm not doing one, I'm going to be doing the other. I'm going to get magazines. I'm going to start finding videos. I'm going to do whatever. And I didn't have anything to do with anything else but that stuff. And skate videos started to influence me. That's where I started to hear Operation Ivy and different things like that. My childhood friend I said that was at the marathon, he was a year older. He was into some punk stuff, introduced me to it, helped me get a Lookout Records catalog and order the first Green Day album and the first Operation Ivy album and things like that. We got into Bad Religion and all this other stuff. And it was just full bore, pedal to the floorboard. Like there was no looking back. I'm going to be into this stuff. This is everything I've ever been looking for right here.
When I think of you being the skate, snowboard, punk rock kid in Alaska, and I don't want to compare Alaskans to people, maybe from like Surrey, BC or something like that, but I feel like there are some similarities. Like when you're a skateboarder in Alaska, do people want to kick your ass just because you're a skateboarder in Alaska?
Oh, yeah. So many times you heard skater fag, I'm going to kick your ass, this, that, and the other. To be honest, I think the thing that helped me out in high school was I was in wrestling.
So you're like half jock and half skater, even though you're all skater in your mind?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't committed to the wrestling the way somebody who was passionate the way I was about snowboarding. I wasn't in the gym lifting and stuff. Christian, my friend, got me into a cross-country running course. So for a PE credit, we would do cross-country running first class every day. So I was doing that. Wrestling was cool because you got to be like physical and you learned confidence because you felt like, I don't know if you remember, Mike, what it was like in school at that time, if you're about the same age as I am,
yeah, I am.
Or close. So in that time period, there was a constant feeling that shit could pop off at any time. All those cliches from movies came from that time period where like the bully could turn around, grab you by the neck and call you out and you got to go fight. So as a young male trying to find yourself and trying to like not get run over and try to not be afraid all the time. Again, I was not big and I was not a bully dickhead, but I didn't want to get run over either. And wrestling helped you feel like if shit popped off, you're going to be able to handle yourself and hold your own. So I think that that's what drew me to that was that it's super competitive, it's super one-on-one, and it allowed you to feel some confidence. Like, all right, I'm going to be okay if anything were to happen.
I can totally see that.
So I had a little bit of respect from those guys. They weren't too shit talky to me. It was more like stonery guys or I don't know, like preppy guys that didn't compete and stuff, that thought they were better because they had nicer things or, I don't know. There's all these weird dynamics when kids are trying to figure themselves out and you got a bunch of them drawn to different paths while they're trying to figure these things out, and it causes conflict. And yeah.
Well, I'll say another big part of your life, and I think it's right about this time, maybe freshman, sophomore year in high school, is you find Boarderline. And that's a shop that starts in like 88, 89. And when you think about the job of the shop back then, it was so much more than just, I'm going to sell you a skateboard or a snowboard. It was a place where culture was created. It was couches and kids watching videos, and you were encouraged to stay in the store for a long time. And it was like the second home for a lot of kids. And was that what Boarderline was to you, was like that second home?
My mom was pretty tight leash. She was brought up with a military family that was super strict, super hold it together. So she had a pretty tight leash on me too, as far as like, you're not going to be running the streets on your own. You're not going to be doing this or that, getting into trouble. You're going to have some structure and you're going to have responsibilities. If you don't figure those responsibilities out, then I'm going to take away these things you're in love with. So I wasn't so much living there. I lived in a different town. So Borderline was in Anchorage. I lived in Eagle River, which was 15, 20 minutes away.
Okay.
But we were all drawn together through USASA competitions. Back then, contests were super important. If you wanted to do anything in snowboarding, you had to compete. That was your gateway to it. So through that, just the idea that, a shop opened and we went to it, I had thought G&B was awesome. And then G&B was kind of starting to fade and it was older dudes. And then this new shop came in and these guys were cool. They were doing the contests at the same time as us. And then you would see them in the shop. Jay Liska was a professional at the time. So he was kind of a really big deal back then.
There's not many pros in Alaska, I wouldn't think, at that point.
No, there were really none at all. So I walked into this store and, dude, you just felt like where I needed to be. Everything you looked at, I was the kind of person, when you pulled open a snowboard magazine, I loved everything. I wanted to look at the ads. I wanted to look at the catalog order forms in the back. I wanted to look at every graphic. I didn't ride hard boots, but I wanted to look at every little piece of Damien's hard boot in the picture that he's got. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't think any of it was whack. I was just completely head over heels in love with this stuff. So this shop came in and these guys lived it. They embraced it. And that's not to say G&B didn't. Those guys lived it too. They were full on. But Borderline came along and really pushed it right when I was starting to get really involved. So we meshed there. And Jay and Scott, they were at everything. So they were older, but they weren't saying like, I'm too cool, I'm not going to show up to this event. If they did an event, they were there and it was awesome. And it wasn't the place I needed to be all the time. What it felt like was, I have a community that feels like I belong. And as much as I was into punk stuff and I would tell everybody, I don't give a fuck about anything. I'm nonconformist. I do what I want because of me wanting to do it. And I'm solo and I don't need anybody or anything. And I'll stand alone. And, I'm like shouting from the rooftops because I'm trying to convince myself at that age that I'm confident and et cetera. But this all of a sudden felt like I did belong. And so what I realized is whether it's kids looking for a gang, whether they're looking for structure, whatever, no matter what you say, there's something out there that will make you feel like you belong, and you'll know that that's right and that it fits and it's what you needed.
So you found your tribe in Boarderline.
I did. I found it around the whole snow skate community, which at that time completely revolved around Borderline. Those guys just dominated it, and they were great. Dude, I met great kids, great people, and I felt like it gave me a place to feel safe enough to be confident in pursuing what I wanted to do, and that allowed me to flourish and become what I was going to become.
Were they your first sponsor? I mean, do they end up hooking you up in the beginning with a Borderline t-shirt and saying you're part of the crew?
Yeah, it was pretty funny because I remember having a discussion with Jay. I would go in and be like, hey, Jay, can I get sponsored? Typical. You know, I have this discussion with kids all the time, like, hey, I want to get sponsored. You're like, cool story. What do you bring to the table?
Right.
Back then, I said, Jay, can I get sponsored? He's like, well, you got any results? And I was like, not really. He's like, you got any video or pictures? And nope. He's like, all right, well, come back when you do. So I went and competed, and I started to do well. You know, the first year I was garbage. Second year I started to figure it out a little bit. And then you know, like you're starting to make a mark. The local scene is really small. So if you start to show some promise, it's going to be known pretty quick. So I started to show a little promise. And then I remember it was getting time for me to buy a board. And I don't know if I was like kind of flexing that or what, but I remember calling, and Scott Liska answers the phone, and I was like, hey, I just wanted to follow up and see if you guys had decided if you were going to be able to sponsor me or not, because I need to buy a board and need to know if there's a deal or whatnot. And Scott goes, hold on. Hey, Jay, should we put this kid on the team? Jay's like, yeah, he's pretty good. He's like, all right, you're on. You get a deal. Then I got a deal. So the beginning was, you know, you got like X percent off, 25% off or whatever, and then some Borderline gear. And I remember I broke my Morrow spoon nose that I bought through them right away. And I was tripping. I was like, oh my gosh, I broke this right away. What am I going to do? You know, I was not in a situation where mom or anybody was going to be like, yeah, we can buy multiple boards every year.
Right.
So Scott was like, just bring it back. I'll give you a new one. Because he was really in tight with Morrow at that time, like did a ton of Morrow business. So it wasn't a tough, these are all things I understand now that I own a shop.
But back then it was like he was going out of his way to make sure you were taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, both things are true. So yes, it kind of comes with the territory of the shop. You have these relationships you can flex to help your people out. And that's what he did. And he took care of me. And then eventually, when I graduated high school, he let me start working at the store. He'd let me come back every spring and work all the way through till the fall. Yeah, it was an amazing time to be in snowboarding. And we had a crew that you'll never be able to replicate. And it hurts me a little inside to know that, because I'll never be able to recreate that again with my own community. That was a piece in the history book, that all the circumstances were different.
Everything lined up back then where there was no social media, and you needed that one core place for everybody to get together, and everything went through that place, and then they're creating the events and they're sponsoring the kids, and everything revolves around that one place that might just be a building with walls, but to all you kids, it was like the center of your universe.
Absolutely. We weren't thinking about the Dodgers anymore. We were thinking about, you know, this place, and getting to be a part of that has just been, that's something I'll be forever grateful for until the day I die, is to know that I got to be with that band of people and experience and live that time period with them.
So you're with Borderline, and then when it's time for you to get another sponsor, I mean, at the time, Burton and Sims are the two major brands. There's other players out there for sure. But when you look at it, Burton was more like, had more of a racier culture to it, and Sims is more the skate style kind of culture. It was like the California dudes. And you end up writing a letter to a regional rep. It's like a sponsor me letter to get onto Burton. And I don't think that works out for you, but what do you send in the letter, and how does that whole thing go?
I don't have the letter that I sent anymore, but I sent a short letter asking to be sponsored, probably about the same content as my initial request from Boarderline.
Right. Nothing to back it up. Just like, hey, sponsor me. I'm good.
You know, a few results, but still, like, I was probably more along the lines of trying to open the conversation. And it was just a quick, nice denial on Burton form lettering. And this rep said, hey, thanks a lot for your interest and whatnot. But, you know, you just really don't have anything to offer at this point, and try again later on.
Does that get you down at all?
A little bit, but I guess it was like my knees starting to hurt in the race, you know? That wasn't going to stop me. I was just going to try harder now.
That's just a speed bump and you're going to fucking power through it.
Yeah, I work pretty well with you setting up the guidelines of what it's going to take to crush something in your eyes. So now I know what expectations I need to meet and how far I need to push it. So I just set a course for fucking destruction and went for it. And let's see, I believe that was probably after my junior year. And my senior year, I start off the year by needing a knee surgery. I'm just starting to get some real momentum going. I tear my knee at my locker of all things. My patella slides over, comes up, cuts the meniscus, and my knee balloons up after school. And within a day, I went and took my driver's test with a clutch and had to do that. But ended up passing that. And then the next day I went into surgery and got it cleaned out. Didn't do my physical therapy at home the way I was supposed to. Kids, adults, whoever's listening, time for a tough conversation. Whatever they tell you to do, make sure you fully comprehend the extent to what they're asking and do it.
Yeah.
Because I thought I was doing what they asked. I was not. And my legs shriveled up on that side. So then I had to do real physical therapy, and I started to miss snowboarding days. And I was like, great. It's all falling apart right in front of me. It's all over now. The other kid that was my main competitive person, he's obviously going to pull out way ahead of me now. There's no way I'm going to catch him. And that ended up being like one of my most progressive winners ever. Because once I got that figured out, I just was off to the races. I'm going to learn every trick I can possibly learn. I'm going to take a beating. I'm going to do whatever I got to do to just push this and be the best I can be.
And after that season, I think, or at the end of that season, I think that's when you go to nationals. And I don't really know how you do at nationals, but I don't think that even matters, because the biggest part of nationals is you meeting the folks from High Cascade Snowboard Camp and lining up a digger job for that summer. Who do you meet, and how does that turn into a job?
So I kind of talked way too much and derailed your last question. So let me kind of finish that one off real quick here.
Okay.
So I push real hard. I do well. I get to go to nationals. This is my senior year in high school, and I go out there, and the local guy, Rick Malone, who was the first guy ever sponsored by Burton up here, he introduces me to the Burton rep. And at that time, that was Mike LaVecchia. And Mike's like, okay, cool, I'll take some runs with you. And we take some runs, and I don't do particularly well at nationals, especially not in the racing, because I chose to wear Plan B jeans in my hard boot setup because I needed to keep it real, because jibbing was a big deal back then. And all the pictures I have of me at nationals that year, all wearing jeans. Just it was all full jeans, 93. But I do well enough in front of Mike that Mike says, hey, I hear you're going out to High Cascade for the summer. Why don't you meet up with our guys? We have a Burton house out there. Get on a board, and we'll let you ride boards during the summer, and we'll see how it goes. So along that way, with your other question, nationals wasn't as much about setting up the summer camp. I had gone to summer camp for a couple years and had worked my way into being able to do a digging job. So the previous year I had paid for one session and got to go for free as a digger for one session.
Okay.
Like a helping digger. And then this summer it transitioned into full on digger. Like you're going to live in the digger house and stuff like that. So I go out to High Cascade. I ride the Burton boards all summer. I don't necessarily particularly know that anybody's watching me. There's not like, oh, hey, the Burton guy's right there or anything. But I'm just like in push it mode. That's what happens. Anybody that you know from that era or any era that gets some positive traction, they didn't spend the day back then like, oh, how can I get a tan up here? It was go from the minute you got there till they kicked you off the hill of like, I'm going to try to learn. I'm going to get beat up. I don't care.
But that's all passion-based. It's because you want to.
That's right. And so by the end of the summer, I called them up like the last day or two of summer that I'm up there. And I was like, hey, just wanted to call and see what you guys felt and what you thought about the summer and whatnot. And Mike said, well, we've had a good summer out there. We talked to the guys. We saw a lot of your riding and we've decided to put you on the factory team.
Holy shit.
Yeah, I skipped out on the rep program and went right to being sponsored by that guy. Now, I didn't necessarily get much more than a rep would have given me at that time, but I got to skip a year step there in hoping that the rep told everybody I was cool.
I mean, you could have skipped like 3 years there. You never know. It all depends on how good that rep is for advocating for you. So it's pretty nice that you got to skip a step. And when you get back to Alaska, I'm going to imagine that Burton sends you your first sponsorship box. And do you remember what was in it and the feeling you get when you get a box of free stuff from like a dream sponsor?
Yep. It was a Burton Ouija board, some bindings, some gloves, and that woodland jacket, or the jacket that looks like wool. Rippy wore it in a few things. And yeah, it was called the sap jacket. I still have it to this day. And dude, I was just flexing that thing everywhere. Anyone I could talk to was like, yep, got this. I'm sponsored. Not really too braggy, but I was definitely like wearing my stuff like, yeah. And then I went to college up here for 1 year, went back to nationals and like actually started to be competitive at that point. I still wasn't winning yet, but I was competitive and starting to show some real promise. And that's how it got kicked off.
So you're with Burton or you're on their program, and this is way before the internet made it super easy to communicate with anyone at any time. And when you're on a program like Burton's, I'm sure you want to be in touch with them just so you kind of have the feeling that they know that you're still representing and still part of the program and just 100% behind the brand. And what is expected of you? Like, are you talking to them once a month and then are you sending in photos and video clips when you have them? I would think it would have to be tapes back then, but is that kind of how you communicate with the brand?
You know, I don't know how it is to be sponsored now, but back then, you know, Burton was my main company. I don't know that many other companies the way they ran it, but they were very vague. And I think they were purposely vague because there was a lot of, although they brought you in and claimed family and we're all together and all that, there wasn't a lot of clear-cut instruction there. There was a lot of vagueness, like, hey, just go out there and really, you know, do your best, see what you can get done, and then let's talk about it afterwards.
Right.
And you're like, cool. How do I mark that box? I don't know. And it was always like that. And that was kind of the bane of my existence with those guys, was that I would do my best. That first year, it was really just, hey, I'm going to send you guys the results. I would call my guy at the factory, the team manager, and I would tell him when I would win a contest and how it went. And that was about all I could relay at that time. We weren't really like filming video clips much. We kind of were.
You were doing it for fun though, right? Like getting stuff from the high school?
Yeah. Yes. So I would put out like an end of year edit with my friends on linear editing equipment and stuff. And we would do that. And then I would typically make, and I did this for a few years before Burtner and I started up our thing together, was I would make VHS copies of, you wouldn't call it a sponsor me tape because I was kind of already sponsored. I would kind of call it my update tape. And most of it was skateboarding. I don't know why, but I would just put the stuff together and then I would mail that off to them. And I'd mail it off to anybody, family, friends, whoever, and be like, yeah, this is what I was doing. And I would push along those each fall. If I got some pictures, I didn't really get a lot in the picture situation, but it was pretty quick that things started happening out at High Cascade and started to get a little bit of notice there and get a clip here and there. Smaller little video productions were becoming really rampant among the industry. So if you were out there as a digger on your free time, you were hitting the jump or the pipe or whatever, there were 4 or 5 filmers everywhere all the time, or a Japanese magazine photographer or this or that that could snap something and it could make it somewhere when you're not even really a big pro or a big deal or any of that yet.
All right. So at this point, we're about halfway through your life and times based on the notes that I have. And going into this, I knew I was going to try to push you for a 2-part episode because you're like 18 or 19 at this point, and we have so much more to talk about, which is why I'm going to ask you to see if you're down with recording a part 2 next week with me. Are you down?
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. Great. But that still leaves us with my final segment of the podcast, and I call that Inappropriate Questions. And this week, I wasn't able to get anyone on the line because this time of year, folks are all in remote locations, and I was able to get people to text in questions. And the first one comes from another podcaster, a dude that I have a ton of respect for, a journalist who has done so many incredible things for snowboarding. Right now, Mark Sullivan is up at Tailgate, Alaska, his stomping grounds, and he texted in this first question. It's called Pizzagate. You were at your peak at the same time as Mark Frank Montoya. Any good stories about your rivalry?
I don't think we had a rivalry, but I think Mark might have thought so at that beginning, because I know what they're talking about. Mark Sullivan's first introduction to Valdez, Alaska was an event called King of the Hill, and he decided to come up as a journalist and cover that by competing in it.
You killed it at that event.
I did. It's funny, if we go back to my history, like the first year I was in King of the Hill, I was 19, had no business whatsoever being involved in this event. Not a single bit. I mean, I was like basically turning into a jib kid, had never ridden big mountains. Despite what people think, Alaskans aren't born on big mountains. We're riding whatever you can get your parent to take you to and drop you off at that hill.
I thought you were born with like a $25 heli bump to the top of crazy peaks with no guides.
I wish. So Scott Liska convinces me because I'm working at the shop, and he's like, "Oh, you're sponsored now? Yeah, do the contest. Do King of the Hill. You got to do it." And I mean, we're talking about you're surrounded by like the gnarliest men in snowboarding. Gnarliest guys on riding and gnarliest human, period. You know, you got
like the farmers?
Farmer,
yeah.
Parada, Goodwill. The list goes on and on and on. And these are like, dude, they're crazy, right? Crazy on and off the hill. Richie Fowler, Jay Liska, crazy stuff. We can get into these stories later because I've got some crazy stories about that time period in Valdez. But long story short, this is a few years in. I think it's probably 98-ish that Mark's talking about. And Mark, he brings, I think, Mark Frank with him too, which at that time we all had this image that Mark is a gangster from Denver, and you're like, you better not look at him wrong or say anything wrong. He carries himself very intimidating figure, very larger than life.
For sure.
And like I said, I learned the lesson early on. You mind your P's and Q's around the right people or you're going to get served. But Mark Frank is the kindest, most awesome dude. As soon as I got to be around him, you know, he was friendly and everything. We didn't get real close on that trip, but later we went on film trips in the future. So I got to know that about him. But at that time, like Mark came up with Mark Sullivan and they both did the King of the Hill. I think they were both in a room together and I was in a room, someone else. And one day I did really well. I won the freestyle day, I believe. And I come back and my door of my hotel is just completely plastered with pizza crust, socks, whatever. I have the picture somewhere of it that it's all taped to my door as my like welcome. Hey, cool, good job. I didn't really take that as a rivalry. I understood, and it felt like a badge of honor. Like, hey, you're kind of being acknowledged here. People don't give you shit unless they care about you.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, you can tell the difference. If somebody's a dick to you, that's because they don't like you. If somebody's giving you shit, it's most likely because they care enough to pay attention to you and bring you into the circle.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel like there was anything weird or wrong with it. I wasn't bummed or pissed about it. And I had just done well that day. So what else could it be, you know?
All right, so that is question number 1. For my next 2 questions, I went with a Powell Movement alumni, one of the sharpest minds in snow, a photographer, a marketer, an events guy, an entrepreneur who has worked for the best brands in snow and beyond. I'm talking about Mike Arzt, and you knew him early on in his career and early on in your career as well. And here is question number 1 from Mike. You've always been a straight shooting, no holds kind of guy. Ever say anything to Jake Burton that maybe you should have held back on?
I don't think so. I don't think I said anything to Jake. What I said was to Barry Dugan, and we can give like some negative shout outs to Barry because I feel like what Mike's talking about is probably pretty integral in me not being on Burton for much longer after that. And I can't remember exactly how it went down, but it was at the 2000 X Games in Mount Snow, and we were in a room of riders. And I basically just was at the height of some angst. I felt like I had really pushed it and done well, and I had won the US Open, had won the X Games previously, was doing all kinds of stuff, getting Mac Dog parts, etc. And couldn't, like at the height of my career, I think I made $36,000 from those guys for a salary. I made more than that off incentives and off contest winnings than I did what they paid me. And this was at the time when I'm beating, I'm doing all this stuff, right? So I wasn't trying to feel entitled or anything, but I was like, dude, you guys set it out here. You're pros that get pro models do these things. Well, I've done these things. What's up? And it wasn't getting me anywhere. So somewhere in the living room of this condo or house that we're all staying at, something comes up. And like I said, I can't recall exactly how it went down, but a comment was made and I got defensive about it and was like, dude, do you really want to talk about that? And it became a little bit of a challenge with Barry and I. And I was like, you want to bring that up in front of everybody? Because if you do, I'm going to tell you what's up. And so he challenged me. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, X, Y, Z here. This is all laid on the table for you. What's up now? And I made my point. But what we learn in life is making your point doesn't always help you win. And in the long run, that definitely is something I would believe. It played a role in me not continuing on with Burton.
I mean, you were like on the top of the world at that point, and you don't move on with Burton after the next season.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't because they were paying me too much. Right, that's for sure. I was approached with some stuff like, hey, do you want to kind of go this Dave Downing route where you don't really have a pro model, but you might get some influence on it and stuff? And I'm like 24 and I'm like at the height of everything. And I'm like, no, why? And nobody stops. And that's what I mean by the vagueness of it. Nobody stops and says, hey, dude, because if you don't, we felt like we missed the boat on advertising you. And if you don't, then we're not going to have anywhere to go with this and we're going to let you go. Nobody gives you that option. They just go, okay, so that's how you feel. You only want a pro model and that's your only option. Okay, cool. And then they come back to you and say, we're not renewing. We're done. Sorry, I hope I didn't skip too much ahead there. But ultimately, that is something that I think may not have done it all, but I could have rephrased it or taken a different route at that time, for sure.
Yeah. All right. We are going to jump into your final inappropriate question from Mike Arzt. Do you remember the Burton house at Crested Butte? You have all of us talking to your girlfriend that was coming to stay, and you didn't want everyone staring at her. You must realize now that this was the reason to stare at her. That's the question.
Is that a question or is that a statement?
I think it's a statement with a question mark at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. That was an interesting time. I think that's the year I won too. But yeah, we went to Crested Butte and I had a girlfriend at the time and I'm sure that I was like, great, she's going to come in. They were allowing me to have her come in and stay in a room with me,
And there's like 30 dudes?
Yeah, not in the same room. But I was like, dude, don't be creeping out. She doesn't know this world or any of that. So don't be creeping on her. But I was probably insecure, I'm sure, and worried about whatever. I don't know, just dumb guy stuff, probably. I don't recall saying that, but I'm positive that Mike has it nailed. Mike is as stand-up as it gets and is hilarious. And I'm sure I've said so many ridiculously inappropriate things around him. So I appreciate him picking one of the mellowest to go with.
All right. So that is part one of our podcast. And what makes this interview so awesome is not only your history, but the fact that you're not afraid to say what you're thinking. There's no media training with you. And that's refreshing because I talk to a lot of people that aren't going to tell that Burton story of you saying the wrong thing to the team manager just because they think it might make them look bad or make them look like they made a bad decision for their career and they want to keep that quiet. But what's awesome about you is you share everything. And that's what's going to make part 2 of this podcast even better because we've got a lot of stuff to talk about there as well. And I thank you for your time in part 1.
Appreciate you, man. Have a good one. We'll see you soon.
So that was part 1 with Jason Borgstede. And like I said, I don't know Jason, but I really feel like he's a hardcore dude. And I mean that in the kindest of ways. For better or worse, this guy is no bullshit. And all he wants is the best for snowboarding, skateboarding, and the culture of both in Alaska. And you know what? Other than family, I bet Jason doesn't care about much else. He knows what he's all about and he doesn't fake anything. Part 2 gets even more real, and both parts are so interesting to me. I can't tell which one I like more. But that's the show for this week. I'm not doing a review of the week this week, as I'm getting back to the live stream of natural selection. So if you have a problem with no review of the week, blame Travis Rice. For now, I want to thank everyone for listening and ask you to support my amazing sponsors. They are Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elan Skis, Stanley, Rollerblade, and Best Day Brewing. Have a great week, everyone.